Hey guys, before the video starts, I just wanted to let y'all know that our coach program is actually expanding threefold. Coaches are all personally trained by me and are there to help you with problems like procrastination, motivation, depression, anxiety, and helping you get unstuck. So check out the first link in the description below. Hey guys, Dr. K here. Today I'd like to talk to you guys about unlocking motivation, which I think is a really important topic. So a lot of times we feel like we don't have motivation. We feel like we're unmotivated and we can't bring ourselves to do things. But if you really tunnel down and pay attention to your thought process, what you'll often find is that you actually really do want to do something and that you actually have a lot of motivation. It's not that you lack motivation, it's that your motivation is actually blocked by something else. And this is a really interesting problem because a lot of times when people think that they lack motivation, they do things to boost their motivation. And none of that stuff really tends to work. Because even if you boost your motivation, if it's kind of blocked or locked up, then motivation boosting strategies aren't going to work. So I'd like to explain this kind of principle, which is that if you really, really want to do something, but you can't seem to bring yourself to do it, what could be going on and how to actually unlock or unblock that motivation. So this actually starts way back in India. So when I was 21 years old, I was lucky or desperate enough to go to India, and I stayed at a monastery for a few months. And I had the privilege of working with a couple of very wise monks. And one of them explained to me that each desire you have, each intention you have, each goal you set for yourself, whether it be small or big, is a little bit of a spiritual drain that kind of pulls at you until it's completed or finished. You can kind of think about each desire that you have in your mind as a karmic tie. And each of those karmic ties that you create for yourself actually tie you up and bind you up until you actually let yourself get free of them. And so we kind of know this because we know that, like, generally speaking, people who set goals will sort of move towards that goal. So if we really think about it, each desire or each intention that we kind of set sort of pulls us in that direction. The problem arises when we get tied up with too many different intentions and too many different desires. And so his solution to me was that if I go back and actually unburden myself of old karmic ties, that my spiritual energy will increase and I'll be able to be more successful in life. And so that may be like a really cool kind of spiritual perspective, but does that actually map onto science? Or does that map onto our understanding of the mind? Let's take a look. So the first example that I want to come up with is the idea that we get paralyzed when we're overwhelmed by a bunch of tasks. So generally speaking, if I have one task that I want to complete, wanting to do something sort of drives us to do it. But what happens is the number of tasks I need to complete increases. What tends to happen is with each task that I add to my plate, I start to become more and more paralyzed. And eventually what happens is people can become so overwhelmed that they become completely paralyzed and can't complete any of the tasks at all. For those of you who have fallen really, really behind in school or work or other things, sometimes, even if you've fallen behind in life, you have to do so many things that you can't even get started. So if we really stop and look at that, what we begin to see is that actually maps onto the spiritual principle of karmic ties pretty well. That the more things that you need to complete, the more paralyzed you become and the harder it is to move forward. Each of those desires you set for yourself, each of those goals you set for yourself is actually kind of a karmic tie that kind of binds you up and paralyzes you. And then you eventually say, oh, I don't have motivation because you have so much stuff to do and you can't bring yourself to do it. If you really tunnel down and you ask that person, how important is this? Let's say it's the most important thing in the world. I really want to do it. I just can't. So if we really look at that, what we see is not that they don't have motivation, but that their motivation is blocked. Let's take another example about how this sort of principle works from psychology. And this example is something that's really fascinating because we take it for granted every day. And this example is in understanding how our mind remembers things. So I know it sounds weird, but let's just pause for a second and realize that our mind remembers stuff, right? Your mind reminds you to pick up milk, or reminds you that you have to work on your resume, or reminds you that, maybe you should apologize to someone for being late, or your mind reminds you about all kinds of things. And so if we look at the process of remembering, how does that work? So we have a conscious mind, and you may be going throughout your day and you're like playing games or watching TV or whatever. And then something somewhere in your mind catapults a particular thought into your conscious mind. Oh, by the way, remember we have to ... Remember we have to ... And so if we really look at this, what we must conclude is that some part of our mind is actually keeping track of all of our incomplete tasks. And the more incomplete tasks we have, the more your subconscious mind has to keep track of, and the more it has to remember, and the more its hands are full with keeping track of all of these tasks. And so what does that mean for people who have blocked motivation? So let's take a look at that. So what we find in people who have kind of blocked motivation is that their conscious mind tells them to do something, but the rest of their being, their subconscious mind, can't really support them in completing that task, right? So you tell yourself, hey, I really need to work on my resume, but then like the rest of your mind sort of, even though you're kind of telling yourself that, the rest of your mind doesn't kind of join you in that task. And the reason is because its hands are full, right? The more that your unconscious mind has to keep track of things and remember things, it sort of serves as kind of like a cognitive load or a cognitive drain. And when your unconscious mind is filled with tasks to keep track of, it can't actually support you in moving forward and actually completing tasks. So each of these incomplete tasks is a psychological burden for your unconscious. And as long as your unconscious mind is burdened, you're not going to be able to act on the motivation that you consciously have. And so these two examples, the idea that, motivation is blocked or we become paralyzed with an overwhelming number of tasks, or even that the more stuff that we have to remember or hold on to unconsciously, the less energy we have, that sounds like a wonderful theoretical psychological explanation. So the next question, and I think this is important because, Dr. K is an evidence-based person, and I really like to look at data. Is there any data to support any of the spiritual hokey stuff or any of these psychological theories? And it turns out there's amazing data for it. And that's what I'd like to share with you guys next. And what we're going to look at is actually Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love this example because if we think about an alcoholic is a person who knows, or hopefully, knows that they need to quit drinking, right? They wake up every day and they tell themselves, I've got to stop drinking, I've got to stop drinking, I've got to stop drinking. So if you look at their conscious mind is highly, highly motivated. But other parts of their being, their body, their brain, their unconscious, call it whatever you want to, the addiction is kind of floating around the surface, around the edges of the conscious mind, and takes control of them and keeps them, actually paralyzes them from following their motivation. So I think alcoholics are a great example of sort of motivation that's locked up or interfered with by other, parts of our mind. And so the question is, what do alcoholics do? And does this principle play at all into becoming sober? And the answer is absolutely yes. So if you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a 12-step program, and one of the steps is what they call making amends. And what the making amends step is that you actually literally go into your past and you think about every person that you've wronged, usually kind of related around drinking, and then you sort of do your best to make amends with them. So you track people down and you apologize. You try to basically fix everything that you've done wrong in the past. And the really interesting thing is that even as people do this step, sometimes they'll relapse, right? So they'll relapse and they'll start drinking alcohol, and you may think that that's a failure, but people in AA say that you need to work the steps. So it's not necessarily that you even need to succeed right away, it's that you just keep working at it. So even if you have a relapse, you should still go and make amends. If you create a new problem with your drinking, you should go and make amends. And the more you work at it, you work the steps, the more amends you make, something magical starts to happen. I've worked with a lot of people with alcohol addiction, and I think the biggest indicator of success in AA is whether they're actually able to complete this step. And what I find is almost magical, that as they start to make amends and as they make more and more amends, suddenly they start to gain power over their alcohol. And whereas 1 month ago they wake up and they have to start their morning with a drink, 1 month later, after they've sort of made all these amends, it seems completely unrelated, but they wake up and they suddenly, their conscious mind is more in control. And they're able to actually attain sobriety, which is what happens in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so the interesting question is, how does that work? And it maps on perfectly to this spiritual principle and these two psychological principles that people with alcohol problems tend to have a lot of pent up stuff floating around in their unconscious. And so their unconscious mind is really burdened. And even though they consciously want to move forward, their motivation is blocked by sort of all of this crap from their past. And the more that they settle those karmic ties, the more they become unbound or untied from their previous desires, previous intentions, previous karma, the more they're able to actually align their motivation and move forward. So I think this is a really fascinating example because at the end of the day, it's been my personal experience as well that it's not about finding motivation, it's about unblocking your motivation. And the way to unblock your motivation, if you really, really want to do something and you're paralyzed in order to do it, I want you guys to be really careful from a diagnostic perspective. If you really want to do something and you're paralyzed, you don't actually lack motivation. Your motivation is restrained. And so you've got to unrestrain it. You've got to free it up. And the way that you do that is actually by settling karmic debts from the past. So if you guys feel stuck in life, I know it sounds completely counterintuitive, but instead of worrying about what you need to do today, go and fix things from the past. Go and apologize to the people that you need to. Go and try to right the wrongs from yesterday. And I know it sounds really bizarre, but like if you really look at it, a lot of people, when they need to complete something and they struggle with motivation, they try to really push through that block and they push themselves, and it doesn't work. And so oddly enough, this can really free you up a lot. And I highly recommend that the more that you settle your past, the more that you unburden your unconscious mind, the freer you're going to feel. And then suddenly you're going to wake up one day and your conscious mind is going to tell you, hey, I need to do this thing. And then something magical is going to happen. You're actually going to do it. And it's going to feel free. It's going to feel easy. It's going to feel effortless. And that's what I really want you guys to learn. I want you guys to learn, not how to work harder, but to understand, how does motivation work? What holds us back? And as you start to unblock it, your life is absolutely going to transform. So I hope that's really helpful. I hope you guys give it a shot, and I wish you all the best.